Odyssey of Nirvana, written by Derek John Wiggins, narrated by Jason Vanderbrink, published by Author House. Chapter 1. Dreams of Heaven. He was always curious about Nirvana. It was rumored to be impenetrable by outside invaders for thousands of years. Through hearsay, it was cities within countless cities, protected by a barrier and magnificent army. Nirvana's laws were not the same laws outside in the wild. Here in Borish was survival of the fittest. Every town in the wild blue yonder had its typical landholder. It was rumored that in Nirvana, law was righteous and run by a deity. All speculation, of course, Arlo thought, as his life held true to a concrete world of hard labor. Law in Boorish was an oligarchical system. All 11 nations were maintained by the selected few, fashioned into an aristocracy or colonialism. For years, the 11 realms fought each other in bloody war after gory battle. Billions of people were whisked off to war to fight for their regime. Churlish and Odium were in a vicious battle now. Arlo wanted out before Boorish declared war on somebody, anybody, again. After the planet, terra firma from Arlo's perception, traveled around the sun 25 times, he had yet to be in war. The last war Boorish had was 15 years ago, but he was too young to join. Boorish, housed on a fold mountain that was once covered in oak trees, was now residence to thousands of dwellings tightly stacked and adjacent to each other. Boorish was hard to defeat in war because of its position, but not impossible. After hearing stories of war and seeing depictions, Arlo wanted no part. He felt everyone lived on one great landmass and couldn't get along. The countries fought over territory as if this 43 million square mile supercontinent, with 2 billion people occupying it, didn't have enough space. All the kingdoms hated each other because they looked different, gluttony, egocentrism, and simply because they thought their way was better. It was said that Nirvana was on a 10 million square mile island, with a population of about 300 million people. Their system was of a democracy and republic. The elites of his world said such a place didn't exist. But then why did so many mercenaries and bounty hunters pursue and imprison or eradicate people who sought Nirvana? Between working construction, building cement dwellings, and the possibility of being drafted into war for 5 years, he had had enough and wanted out. Since his parents and all his siblings died in past wars, he wanted to see if there was a better life for himself outside of his country. He secretly met with a group of people called Vast, who thought the same as he did. For months, they had been plotting a voyage to the holy state, Nirvana. He had heard gossip of some people making it, though most did not. He was willing to take that leap of faith. In his opinion, it was better than building with stones, steel, and cables for the rest of his life. Arlo was going to sleep well tonight, because tomorrow he was departing Boorish. He, with the help of Vast, had set up a charter with a pirate to the holy nation of Nirvana. It was going to take about 4 days to reach this kingdom. Excited, he couldn't sleep, and stared up at 2 satellites. The first, closer, blemished gray moon, in its first quarter phase, illuminated the evening sky neon blue. The farther satellite, in a crescent, shone pale green and poppy gold. Finally, the stars outside his round window faded away. They disappeared because he fell asleep in his bed, in his white and brown stone apartment high in the mountains. As he dozed, he knew he had to get up before sunrise. With dreams of Nirvana in his head, tonight he was in heaven. Chapter 2. Dancing on Rocky Terrain. Arlo woke just before dawn. He knew what he had to do to prepare for an adventure of a lifetime. In myrtle-colored thob and cloak, equipped with his backpack and 2 daggers on his belt, he was ready for the expedition to the Divine Kingdom. He briskly walked down the mountain on a granite trail out of the city under the indigo morning sky. He had to first go to Behemoth to travel on a vessel to Nirvana. A priest named Cooper was to meet him on the path to help him cross the Talisman Desert. Cloud cover kept the day literally blue as it began to drizzle. It took 40 minutes to walk down the mountainside, leaving his cement world behind. Though everyone was still asleep, soon the markets would be full, children running about, dogs barking, and civilians heading to work to provide cement and wires for their nation and others. With one last look at the mountain city, vulgar of Boorish, with its thousands of dwellings cramped together far above sea level, he hoped to never return. Arlo saw a black-cloaked figure materialize from behind a quaking aspen tree to stand on the road. As he approached the man, he noticed the hooded cloak was actually maroon. The man, who was older than him, held a burgundy staff. Arlo had to cite a saying to make sure this was the right man. "The world is a book," he said. The holy man was supposed to say, "With age comes wisdom, with travel comes understanding." The man did say this, and Arlo knew for sure he was about to embark on a journey of an era. "Cooper, I'm pleased to meet you," Arlo introduced himself. "I'm delighted to meet you too, young one," Cooper answered. "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step." "My name is Arlo and—" "I know who you are," Cooper interrupted. "We don't have time for a proper introduction. We have to move." They jogged across the Talisman Desert's rocky gravel bottom and tall grass, dodging shrubs. The rain fell harder, and they both covered their heads with hoods. "Of all days, God had to make it storm today," Cooper barked. Arlo soon knew why Cooper was so mad at the rain, or God. Arlo heard thunder rumble above, felt the wind pick up, warm air. A storm was brewing. Lightning flashed, and the rain slowed again to a drizzle. It was not the rain that bothered Cooper. It was the lightning strikes that smacked the ground near the grass and shrubs. "Move!" Cooper shouted. As they ran, lightning clobbered the lush ground, sparking fires as if missiles were falling from the sky. God was throwing fireballs, Arlo thought, trying to dissuade him from seeking Nirvana. Leaving the scorched, lightning-struck grasslands behind, Cooper found shelter for them in a monastery. The ancient monastery was probably beautiful and enormous, once upon a time. Most of the foundation was intact and made of wide stone stairs. The first floor still existed, with half of its 3 brick walls standing with holes to show where the windows once were, the ceiling long gone. Lightning hit the top of these walls and disappeared. Fire and lightning exploded around the abbey, but never came inside. "God will protect us here," Cooper said. "Stay in the center." As they sat in the middle, next to a stone pedestal, Arlo closely studied his surroundings. There was more to the place than he thought. 2 human-sized statues of angels on pedestals, their hands reaching towards the heavens, still remained. One of the sculptures was decapitated. Some pillars, once colorful, still stood with nothing to hold. Arlo wondered what kind of place this once was. He figured the priest knew all about it. Now didn't seem like the time to ask as they stood to leave the monastery. The lightning had ceased, but the rain came back down in buckets. As they moved away from the structure, Arlo knew it was not only God that protected them, but the aluminum and copper rods still sticking out of its decrepit walls. Just like God blessed them with their interchangeable cloaks that protected them from any harsh environment. As it rained, their cloaks produced a preen oil, making them waterproof. There was no magic to the cloaks or ancient church. Arlo let Cooper think this happening was because of God for now. Midday, while they were still walking through the rocky grass, The sun peeked out of gray clouds to dance light beams across the landscape. The clouds squeezed out drizzle again, not letting up, keeping the ground damp. Arlo could hear the drizzle hit the ground like pebbles. He soon was in tune with the rhythm of these water-sounding stones, trying to distract himself from the pain of walking for what seemed like forever. Something startled Cooper, other than the rain. "Shh," Cooper said. "I fear we're not alone." The camouflaged thing, with the head of a rattlesnake and body of a scorpion, came out of the ground and lunged at them. As Cooper pushed Arlo away, the arthropod caught Cooper by the leg and flung him. The arthropod, which was the size of a human, lashed out at them with its claws, tail, and mouth. Arlo swung his daggers but missed the evasive insect. Quickly bouncing up from the ground, Cooper blocked the creature's claw and tail attacks with his staff. He then stabbed through its exoskeleton to continue into its thorax with the rod. The bug squeaked as its white, pale green blood splattered everywhere. "Move! Head for the hills!" Cooper shouted. "Watch out for their stingers!" As they ran for the rocky hills, more arthropods emerged from the ground and from behind bushes. After jogging a mile, they made it to the hills, pursued by countless invertebrates. "Climb," Cooper said. "They'll stop following because they can't hear our tremors." "Wouldn't they still see us?" Arlo asked. "Their vision is bad. Keep moving." It took an hour for them to lose the insects in the treeless hills. To Arlo's horror, he discovered a dehydrated carcass of a man, probably drained of blood. He nearly stumbled over the cadaver laid out in the bush. He glanced at the face stuck in a scream. "The poor sap must have been unlucky with the arthropods," Arlo thought. "Stay away from the cactuses, they're poisonous," Cooper said. They briskly walked through a rocky cactus field as heat and hot drizzle blew in every direction. Dead rodents, big and small, laid about the ground prickled with spines. Sunbeams broke through thick onyx and charcoal clouds to dance on the ground. A haze soon choked out the twinkling sunlight, turning the sky evenly gray. "How do you know all this?" Arlo asked. "How many times have you come through here?" "I was never here before," Cooper responded. "You'll never get a scroll long enough to satisfy me." Arlo did not respond. He only felt maybe he too should have read more about this trip to Nirvana. He also realized that his aspiration to reach Nirvana was stronger than his knowledge. He had found the right person, a priest, and had done his research on that. Arlo had asked his best friend Scoop questions about Nirvana while at work. The secret organization Scoop knew about was called VAST. Arlo, using his computer at home, on a secure channel contacted Cooper, a Vastite, and arranged to meet today to leave for Behemoth. They now saw Behemoth, far on the horizon. It took many hours before creeping ever closer to the country. Arlo could see the enormous castle-looking province and smelled the salt of a large body of water. Most of Behemoth had thousands of gigantic fortress-like structures that housed hundreds of thousands of dwellings. Some were built into a mountainside, but most were on ground level. The Port Nation, as it was nicknamed, displayed the obnoxious sea in front of it. Here would be the beginning of his journey, Arlo knew. Cooper had delivered his promise. Chapter 3. The Port Nation. The clouds cleared enough for them to see the kingdom in all its glory. As the drizzle slowed, Arlo could see thousands of people in markets and heading home from work. He noticed many boats in the harbor at the sea's edge. He also observed the abundance of airboats of different sizes. Hundreds of them riddled the sky as they moved in all directions, in and out of port platforms high in the mountain and citadels. "One thing about terra firma, we have mastered the air engine," Arlo reflected. These engines made the boat-like vessels continuously float in the sky for about 10 years before they needed to be refueled. We invented centuries ago exhaust nozzle mechanisms that housed hydrogen peroxide, liquid fuel, and methane that defied gravity to maneuver horizontally in the air. In Boorish, these ships were either built for war or for shipping merchandise, not public transportation. In most countries, it was strictly this way. In Behemoth, it was transportation for everybody, for a price. Behemoth had fought many wars years ago to receive transportation rights. To enter these borders, Arlo and Cooper showed their passports, and then they were brought through a gate guarded by soldiers. It was the same for all countries. You could leave your province willingly, but to get back or enter another, you had to show a passport. Every territory had a universal tracking computer called the TC that monitored every human since they were born. Nanotechnology tracking devices in everyone's blood ensured this process. The TC scanning units were becoming the preferred way to track people. Soon the passport would become irrelevant. "Let's get some grub," Cooper suggested. They walked up 20 flights of spiral stairs with no railing to find an eatery on Flight Deck 7. A man with many tattoos, rings on his fingers, and earrings in his ears and face served them food. Arlo paid with credits on a card for some soup and steak to eat with Cooper. "Thanks," Cooper said, "and thank God we can eat." Arlo observed his surroundings again. The refectory was lit up in red and blue lights. The benches and tables were not too crowded. A huge green neon sign outside and inside read Demeter. Arlo also watched Cooper survey the place. "We're looking for Imhotep," Cooper said. "Who is that?" Arlo asked. "It's not a who, it's a vessel. We're looking for Docking Bay 16. Arlo nodded and continued eating his food. As the sun started to sink below the horizon, they reached Bay 16, one more flight of stairs up. Arlo peeked over the rickety wood and steel walkway with no banisters and wondered if anybody had fallen by mistake. Probably many people had plunged to their deaths, he thought, as he saw the Imhotep about 50 feet away at the end of this death trap of a docking bay. As they got closer, the air fishing boat looked a lot bigger than he had imagined. Usually transportation boats fit about 5 people and had 2 rooms, a bathroom and a cockpit. The Imhotep appeared to comfortably fit 10 people and had 2 major multi-barrel firing guns, one on the stern and the other on the bow. A rusty tan android greeted them on the port side of the motionless hovering skycraft. Its voice sounded electronic. "Ahoy, ye landlubbers. I need to see your credentials." Arlo and Cooper showed the droid their passports. It looked over their credentials with one eye. The other was covered with an eye patch. "I see you scallywags paid for a one-way trip," the tan humanoid said. It had oily bandages on its arms and legs. "Our one-way trip is our business," Arlo said. "Our trip is no questions asked." The robot grabbed Arlo by the throat and lifted him up. "You pay heed here, bilge rat. You focus on us, or it's walk the plank for you on your—" The robot was cut off by Cooper's staff that it caught in its other hand. "Avast there, ye old sea dogs," said a man coming down the companionway. "Calm down, everybody. Tug, let him go." Tug, the cyborg, let go of Arlo and he dropped to the deck. "Forgive him. He's my pilot and sometimes muscle and not a good negotiator," the man said. "I'm Ezra, captain of this vessel and your voyage at your service." "Forgiveness does not change the past," Cooper said, "but it does brighten our future." "I like that," Ezra smiled. "Now get on board. We have much to discuss." Arlo rubbed his neck and Cooper stared at Tug as they stepped aboard Imhotep. Tug, with its one eye, gazed at them. Arlo felt, if droids had feeling, this one was vexed. Ezra led them into the mess hall. Arlo noticed the entrails of the ship were clustered with machinery, computers, pipes, pipeline wheel valves, nozzles, and wires. The color of the ship was the same on the outside as it was in the interior: gray, rust, lime green, and silver, with a lot of grit. They sat in a circle on metal slits protruding from the wall around a wooden table bolted to the floor. Yellow lights in the walls illuminated the space. "You two paid a high price to come aboard my ship. He must know that my probability of getting us to Nirvana is high, Ezra said. Arlo glanced at Cooper. He thought Cooper was just a guide to Behemoth that led him to the Imhotep. Cooper, and now Ezra, had convinced him that Nirvana had some true existence. Arlo wondered if the one and only true God that was professed to have created this state was real. He wondered more if Cooper, being a priest, believed in this particular God too, for he was also on a one-way trip to Nirvana. "Guys, listen up," Ezra frowned before continuing. "As soon as the sun sets, we'll make for New Primeval. We're traveling with a 7-ship caravan. After our first stop, another pickup at New Primeval, it'll be about a 4-day trip to Nirvana. I'm not going to lie to you guys, this road will be treacherous. We'll be hunted by bounty hunters. Do you have any questions?" Arlo quickly raised his hand. Ezra sighed deeply. Chapter 4. Imhotep. Arlo watched through a porthole the setting sun transform the misty sky orange and pink, and where the night crept up sapphire. Ezra, who answered all their questions bluntly, escorted Arlo and Cooper to their quarters. "No," Ezra said, "I have never set foot in Nirvana. Why? Because I'm in it for the fortune and glory, kids. I've survived this perilous road many times. It is what it is. But then, hell, there's no guarantees on anything, lassies." "And lastly, are we going to have a problem with Tug?" Cooper asked. Ezra pouted before answering. "Tug is Tug. Don't disrespect him. He won't have you walk the plank. Trust me, you're going to need that out here where we're going." Ezra smiled on his way out of the guest cabin. Arlo unpacked his backpack and sat on his bed. Besides the smell of the place, he liked his new cramped quarters. He didn't like the stench of wire and metal, but loved the computer consoles and huge square digital window that mimicked the outside next to his cradle. Cooper settled across from him on the opposite wall. Arlo thought the bed and wall were fitting for him, considering his stoic demeanor. Part of what Arlo unpacked was a blue tartan blanket that he spread on his stained mattress. Tug entered the room offering blankets, which they took. They thanked Tug, but had left without a word. As Arlo lay on his bed, he watched the sunlight leisurely tiptoe toward the skyline of the palace-looking city. Cooper had already fallen asleep when Arlo looked over at him. Darkness sneaked into the heavens outside, and that's when he saw some airships taking flight. The white, red, and green lights of the ships twinkled like slow-shooting stars. Arlo sensed the ship he was aboard vibrate as G-forces kicked in. They were accelerating fast into the night over the sea. Arlo, after an hour nap, sat up in his bed and turned on the computer above the headrest. The processor displayed a baby blue touchscreen hologram. Bringing up the ship's logs, he studied 2 places of many that this vessel had frequented. This ship had been to Perfidius and the infamous Knavish, Arlo examined. Knavish was legendary for its strict laws and authoritarian rule. It was the only country constantly at war. They had been at war for 20 years to the day. He then studied the 7-ship caravan and Imhotep's latest mission. This ship, with Poseidon, Bennu, Curti, Ore, Helios, and Zephyrus, were all headed to Nirvana. The convoy had 12 ships during a mission 3 years ago, but 5 were shot down by bounty hunters. Now this was what was left of the crew. Arlo then studied Imhotep's archives on Nirvana. What he saw he already knew about the country, except for the images. Images of Nirvana were banned in his country and many others. This ship showed 6 illustrations of Nirvana. All the diagrams showed different adaptations of a steel wall mounted on a massive cliff encompassed by a coastline. Some depictions showed mammoth pipes embedded in the mountain cliffs, with water flowing out of them into a sea. Just above the wall, he saw thousands of skyscrapers. Ah, Nirvana, Arlo thought. He couldn't wait to see it. He couldn't wait to touch it and know its authenticity. Arlo went back to sleep, getting familiar with the to and fro sway of the airborne ship. Dreams of Nirvana haunted him. He fantasized a metropolis of heavenly status. Cooper's words about Nirvana echoed in his brain. In Nirvana, there are many mansions. Arlo envisioned a kingdom of pure gold like transparent glass, green jasper towers, and crystal-clear water. Arlo awoke to the continuous sway of Imhotep. Morning light from the digital portal window hit him in the face, and he sat up. He wanted to see outside with his own eyes. He got up and walked through a tunnel of rusted pipes and rivets to go topside. Climbing a ladder, he found himself on the stern and a mile above sea level. He saw the Poseidon and Helios up close, keeping up with the cruising speed of Imhotep. The ships looked like different-shaped fishing liners, tugboats, and submarines with metal or timber houses built on top. The Imhotep had antennas, tire fenders on the port and starboard sides, box-like engines, and flaps and rudders protruding from the hull and keel. Some ships had rotary cannons mounted from bow to stern. Other ship decks were equipped with artillery guns littered everywhere on the craft. All the vessels, some bigger, some smaller, looked somewhat the same, gray eroded metal and tattered. It all appeared picturesque from his vantage point in the clouds, far above the honeydew and powder-blue obnoxious sea manifest in every direction. The air was chilly but tolerable as he closed his eyes for a second feeling of the wind on his face. When Arlo opened his eyes, again he looked toward the bow to see a patch of ferns and evergreens where the obnoxious sea met the light blue sky. "Morning, landlubber," Ezra said, walking up to Arlo from behind. "Coming up, that'll be new Primeval, and in it, the Kingdom of Affront." Chapter 5. Fugitive. In the cramped mess hall with yellow lights illuminating them, Arlo, Cooper, and Ezra ate soup. The hot soup made Arlo feel warm inside as he sipped it. "We'll be docking soon in the front," Ezra said. "I'd stay aboard. This'll be a brief pickup." Cooper nodded. "When you go ashore, I'd like to join," Arlo spoke. "I've only read things about a front. I'd love to at least set foot on its soil." "You fall behind, you're on your own," Ezra warned him. "You may as well stay here in a front." Arlo had read about a front's history. They were a totalitarian monarchy society of vicious warriors. They were unique, never gaining or losing territory for about 200 years. A front was triumphant in most wars through kamikaze tactics. Most of the country was engulfed in a dense rainforest. The 7 ships passed background checks after a front security scanned the ship's individual computers. They soon passed the main air control checkpoints. As the Imhotep and the rest of the convoy slowly descended toward tangled trees, Arlo surveyed what he could from the deck. As far as he could observe in every direction, he saw a canopy of every shade of green the mind could conjure up. Moving closer to a jungle of emergent trees, he soon recognized hundreds of pure white dwellings and prehistoric stone towers wrapped up in the mangrove foliage. Ancient stone slabs jutted out of the towers where the Imhotep glided alongside to hover. Arlo and Ezra stepped off the Imhotep to walk along the slab to a hole at the end, and walked down an iron spiral ladder connected to a black granite pillar. The climb down the thick vine column took 10 minutes, and he watched the other aviators on 6 distant pillars do the same. Arlo examined a front from the view of the understory. The detritus of the rainforest was blanketed in bluebells, huge wildwood trees, and one massive Denesia excelsa tree. The tree's branches disappeared into the canopy, and its buttress roots sunk deep into a neon-green bog. White huts embedded in the trunk and branches littered the tree, swirling all the way up. As Arlo and Ezra reached the forest floor, some sunbeams found their way through to spotlight the green world. The glow of cantina sheds lodged in this colossal tree were the only other lights in the underbrush. They moved past crowds of people moving back and forth across the bog on petrified wood pathways. Citizens of many races on these footpaths wore elegant attire of many colors. The trails displayed many routes into the forest and the tree. In a cantina hut about 10 stories up in this tree, they met the other caravan pirates. Arlo scanned the height and width of the place that could probably hold thousands of large or tall animals. Wires, rivets, and machinery were entangled everywhere on the ceiling and walls. White, yellow, and red bulbs were littered over bars where people were being served. The dust-faded tiled floor had enough space for thousands of people, Arlo figured, but today he saw only a few hundred. Maybe it was too early for the people of the front. If it was too crowded, he could imagine someone might slip over the side, because here too there was no railing. "You have your knives, kid?" Ezra asked. "Things could get dicey." Arlo followed Ezra's gaze to some people cloaked in green camouflage outfits and with headsets walking in groups of 4. They were affront troopers who roamed about heavily armed with rifles and machine guns. "Yeah," Arlo answered. "How about you?" "Locked and loaded, kid." Ezra moved his tan coat tail to show the fancy decorated ivory musket pistol on his hip. The caravan skippers huddled at a bar, ordered drinks, and talked about their commuters' timely arrivals. "Just imagine," Jax, skipper of the Poseidon, said, "being here so many times and never seeing most of this bush." "You see, son, we're foreigners and restricted to this region only," Ezra explained to Arlo. Arlo nodded. Hours passed and the dwelling began to fill with more people. The place also filled with a mist, like plumes of smolder rising from the ground, forming billows under the canopy. Arlo realized the forest had an ecosystem of its own. One at a time, the captains of the Bennu, Kurti, and Ore vacated with their human cargo, telling the other captains that they would wait for them aboard their own vessels. "My guy hasn't shown yet," Shadow, commander of the Helios, said. "I'm heading back." "My suggestion? You should leave, brother," Jack said, tapping Ezra on the shoulder. "Going to wait another minute," Ezra answered, and watched Jax of the Poseidon and Dixie of the Zephyrus leave with their travelers. After 5 minutes, Arlo took his last sip of some milky beer and heard Ezra whisper, "Time to go." Then Arlo followed him out of the saloon. The commotion came from behind them. They heard the sounds of gunfire, people running, some screaming. Ezra whipped out his custom-made automatic flintlock pistol with silencer, a light on the bottom and scope on the top. Human figures emerged out of the mist, running past them, except one auburn-hooded individual. Ezra aimed his pistol at the individual. The character unveiled a sword from beneath their cloak, low to the ground in an agile combat stance. Arlo noticed strange blue circular tattoos on the backside of the small hand holding the blade. "Hey, buddy, nice hand cannon," the figure said. Then she asked, "Who's the skipper of the Imhotep?" "I'm Nova." "You're looking at him, darling," Ezra answered. "It seems you've caused a ruckus." "Then you found what you've been looking for," Nova said. "I think we should move," Ezra said, "expeditiously." The three ran to the wooden path across the swamp, back toward the ancient towers that were now enclosed in smog. Shots rang out as bullets whizzed by their heads. Arlo saw a glimpse of men in green attire pursuing them. As the three ascended the granite pillar's spiral ladder, more bullets whizzed by them, but in the opposite direction. The Poseidon was firing its guns at the pursuing security of a front, which caused them to withdraw into the cover of the mist. After a 5-minute climb in haste, Arlo couldn't tell if any law enforcement were hit. The Poseidon kept blasting in segments, as if picking targets. Individually, the ships started taking off. Drifting into the light blue sky first was the Bennu, Helios, then Kurti, followed by the Ore. The Zephyrus went next, as the three ran across the docking slab toward Imhotep. "Move!" Jax bellowed from Poseidon's deck. "They've summoned the Marabou!" As the three made it aboard the Imhotep, Tug at the controls on the bridge lifted the ship into the sky. Ezra, Arlo, Cooper, and Nova joined Tug on the bridge and watched the Poseidon on their starboard side rise into the clouds as they did. Airborne, and traveling at 130 knots, all 7 ships veered around each other to avoid gunfire from 5 black-winged combat aircraft descending upon them. Observing one of the cockpit screens, Arlo saw how the combat crafts appeared and identified as Marabou patrol jets. The marabou resembled rhombus, ogive, and trapezoid shapes with an underbelly of corrosion and nose of ivory mixed with muck. Symbols on both wings showed a green stork representing a front. The marabou jets were agile and swift, whereas the 7-ship caravan were sluggish and cumbersome. The marabou's guns were like pebbles, whereas the caravan's weapons were like boulders. The heavy firepower triumphed over the swift jets. A front patrol lost 2 of its crafts from the volley of shells from Poseidon, Kurti, and Imhotep. The only damage to the Imhotep and company from the marabous were a few dents and small holes added to the many depressions and punctures already there. The 3 remaining marabou understood they were outgunned and retreated. The caravan soon slowed to cruising speed, leaving a front far behind them. "That was a ride," Ezra said. "Everyone okay?" Everyone nodded except Tug. "It's been a while since we had action in a front," Ezra said as he glanced at Nova. "You've read my resume," Nova said. "I have been jailed and riddled with many citations and warrants. Long story short, they don't want anybody heading to Nirvana. It's been forbidden in these lands for hundreds of years. My undercover name had been hacked by a front security. PC tracking surveillance must have been all over me. I hid in the rafters until the last of you skippers began to leave. Then I guessed you were the Imhotep." "It's true," Cooper said. "A front has one of the harshest laws in the world." "Well, kiddies," Ezra said, "settle in. It's a long way to Nirvana." Arlo studied the many computers and touch holograms at Tug's metal fingertips. Inside and out, the area was mostly ash gray and tarnished with makeshift fused bolts and steel. The 4 windows on the bridge had no glass, and air whooshed in around them. Arlo could see why this was built for Tug. "Well, I feel dirty. What kind of showers do you guys have?" Nova asked no one particular. Tug pointed toward the back of the bridge and exited with her. "We have the best," it said. "We have SRS, steam recycling showers." Arlo watched Nova leave. She had a pretty round face, eyes angled upward, and was dressed in turquoise alabaster leather, shapely under her cloak. Arlo noticed Nova glance at him with a smirk on her face. Before leaving the bridge, Arlo stared into the passing clouds. The clouds above the ship moved horizontally, as the clouds below traveled parallel but in the opposite direction. The Imhotep vibrated slightly, dancing in the middle of the wind shear. Arlo marveled at this atmospheric event, but only Nirvana and, oddly, Nova's grin were still on his mind. Chapter 6. The Irate Quadrant. The borders of Loathe were nothing but hundreds of miles of pampas grass and straw in every direction. 3 huge olive-black and crimson hairless wolves with riders trotted back to the trounce. The trounce looked like a 500-foot-tall rectangular building with no windows, flipped horizontally and floating 50 feet above the tan, grassy plains. The craft's metallic skin, riddled with bullet holes, impressions, and sludge, still glimmered in the afternoon sun. The large ramp from behind the ship led in a mini light tank that was camouflaged with ash gray and charcoal metal, making it look as if it was demolished. If it weren't in motion, or for the man in the cupola, it would look bombed out. 2 androids with machine guns guarded the ramp and boarded the ship when the group arrived. Duke, in his burnt umber rawhide jacket and pelt fedora, sat astride his K9 Bolt and thought about the mission they just completed. They had tortured 5 criminals from Behemoth after finding them here in Loathe, thousands of miles away. Duke and his 3 companions, Ollie and Tucker, on the backs of wolves, and Boots in the tank, didn't care about human life, or any life, for that matter. The 5 fugitives had stolen possessions and killed their neighbors, then went on the run for 3 years. Duke had taken the contract Behemoth authorities had offered, which was for a large sum of money to eliminate the criminals. It took Duke and his crew of independent contractors a few months to track them down, check their DNA, which linked them to the misconduct, and terminate them. Once their skulls were sent back to Behemoth, they would be paid. Duke, the last to board the trounce, closed the ramp, then found his way to his quarters. He undressed before he stepped into the shower to wash blood from his hair and face, and wondered about his 30 years of scars and buckshot abrasions all over his body from his profession. He knew this was the perfect profession for his crew, because they all shared narcissistic, sociopathic, and psychopathic behaviors. Duke laughed at himself. It was ironic that they all supervised each other. The only thing stopping them from killing each other was equal pay, using murder for a business, and they had plenty of space on the ship. After his shower, he took his clothes from the washing processor, dressed, and took the horizontal elevator to the bridge. The two androids flying the ship ignored him as he sat in the captain's seat in the center. "Bring us to Behemoth, cruising speed," Duke demanded as he lit a smoking pipe. The android's fingers made quick work on the digital consoles and holographic touchscreens to start the engines. Though Duke knew his crew was dysfunctional, he saw them as components. Others might say he saw them as family. Ali was the wild one who wore no shirt, showing off his muscles and wounds, and acted like a beast most of the time. Tucker had a silent demeanor, and his body was mostly titanium and Kevlar prosthetics, except his cranium, which was protected in Teflon wrapped in platinum. Boots was also a discreet individual, always dressed in tight black leather and a jet black sombrero, and trained with every weapon this world had to offer. Duke adored working with them, because they were all astute but maniacs, zealots. As Duke sat back in his ruby buffalo hide seat, the intercom blinked on his console. "Yeah," he answered. "This is Ref Control," came a familiar voice. "We have a 4110 mission for you again. They just don't get it." "Holy shit, Fezco, that's you?" "Yeah, familiar problem. Repeat offenders. Same pay as before, depending on how many you shoot down this time," Fezco responded. Duke laughed. "Target practice. Send the aspects." "Not a problem. Specifications coming through." Fezco, a bail bondsman from the REFF, was like their employer, their deity. Currency and death flowed in their veins, the only thing they understood, and Fezco provided it all like a drug. Fezco called them the Crazy IQ. That didn't stand for Duke's group's intelligence. It signified Irate Quadrant. Fezco knew he needed these freelance killers when the normal authorities failed. Assignment 4110 was an illegal escapee caravan that had a habit of always flying over restricted airspace. The once 12-vessel caravan was always shipping illegal immigrants into the so-called God City, Nirvana. Duke knew many countries paid big to bring these immigrants, escapees, and so-called rapists back, dead or alive, depending. Duke remembered the particularly evasive 12-ship convoy that had escaped most bounty hunters unscathed. 3 years ago, his team met this group and reduced them to 7 ships. It seemed like from the report Duke read on his computer, the convoy hadn't learned their lesson. He would soon inform the others of another payday. More information flooded in about his new mission. This time, he felt the convoy would not make it to Nirvana. The Trounce cruised through the clouds with no symbols on its hull. It was almost invisible in the sky if it weren't for the dirt and blast scars. Some people might have mistaken it for a cargo ship, Duke thought, and tried to rob them of their possessions. Those few people would have made a grave mistake. Chapter 7. The Convoy.